There we go. Okay. Now let me put this thing back over here, and then I will begin. So many choices. Tell me this. Do you have the share screen there?
Yes.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. Okay, welcome to class number 3. Originally, this was called Judea against Greece and Rome, but it's the basic. We're talking about the Hellenistic and Roman period, and we say against Greece and Rome because there's 2 major conflicts, or really 3, that we're very familiar with. The first is the Hanukkah story, which is the conflict between the Maccabees against the Syrian Greeks, and the second is the Jewish war against the Romans that culminates in the destruction of the temple and then the fall of Messiah. And then there's Jewish War 2, which is the Barcode Revolt, which sort of ends the period of military conflict against Rome and turns the Jewish strategy more towards the strategy of accommodation. That being said, much of the much of the conflict between the Jews which is in the north of Egypt, and a lot of the tensions and will reflect on the relationship between Jews and Greeks and Romans in Egypt. So we'll be reflecting on both 2 groups, speaking the same language, and we'll see how they interplay with each other. But one question I want to start with is here you see they call it pre-Christian anti-Semitism, because part of the debate among historians of anti-Semitism is whether there is an anti-Semitism before Christianity or if anti-Semitism is driven by Christianity. Those that want to see the Christianity as a fault for that anti-Semitism is a form of Christianity or an effect of Christianity. And we'll talk about that starting, we don't have class next week, but the week after, when we talk about the early Christian period, see how it's driven by the initial Christian story. The Christians break away from Judaism, so they reflect back on the Judaism that was the wrong direction of things against, and that breeds hatred that turns it out of a long history in Christian-Jewish relations.
Can you hear? A lot of us, maybe all of us, are experiencing real sound problems. It's if you look at the chat, you can see it's choppy. It keeps going in and out. There's an echo.
What do you think about that? Okay. You want to try the? Are you on the TI Cafe or are you on the BCHS one? It's being difficult. All right, give it a second, see what we can do. Are there others that had the same problem? I can't see the chat on my screen. Are there others that have the same problem?
Yes.
I think we're all having it.
Yes.
Definitely. You all heard me because you all answered.
Yes.
All right, give us a minute.
I'm not sure what's doing it.
Should I unmute my screen and then like talking to my screen? I can turn this way. Should I try that?
You can,
Is that going to echo then?
well, I have to turn off everything else.
Okay.
So we would lose the video of you.
All right. Well, we can lose the video and then have the share screen, so that's okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we try that? And then if it doesn't work, we'll go back. Okay, so we're going. I have to get that. Okay. How do I do that? So I have to stop the share. That's what I have to do. Stop the share. Very hard to do it. can unmute. Okay. Try to. So I have to face, then we have to turn that off. So that's annoying. It's a little annoying. Maybe if you don't hear me the first time, it's good.
The sound is.
Okay, hello, everyone. We're going to try this. Is the sound any better?
Yeah.
Thumbs up?
Yeah.
All right, good.
Much better, yes.
Okay, let me put the share screen back on. Hold on. I have to open that up. Okay, great. No, here it is, and there it is.
Unmute. You have to unmute. You're muted, Rabbi. Fine. Oh. Oh, Rabbi, fine, you're unmuted. Oh. You're muted.
We can't hear you at all.
Rabbi, your sound is turned off. We can't hear you, Rabbi.
Rabbi, your microphone is off. You're muted.
He can't hear us either.
Yeah.
My goodness, we're doing very well. Oh, no.
Could you unmute yourself so we could talk?
We are.
Yourself in time. Your microphone is off. You can't hear us.
It's so terrible. Maybe we don't want to learn about this anti-Semitism. I don't think that's true.
We have a problem of communication here.
Does he have a cell phone number?
You want to call him on his cell phone? Good idea. We'll call him on his cell phone. I'll do it.
Things they never taught about in rabbinical school.
Yeah, but where's our tech help? Come on.
Can anybody email or call somebody who's there physically, not the rabbi? He may not answer the phone.
Yeah, his phone is probably off.
Right, so
Stacy, can you call 11?
at the synagogue and you can call them.
That's a good idea.
Actually, his video is off here too. Right?
Yeah.
Does someone know who's
I-
there?
Wayne Miller might know if anybody can contact him.
I think this is a case of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
I don't know.
It sounds like it was Evan Fleischman that's there. Touche, yeah, that would make sense.
Evan
Is he at the
Fleischman.
shul or is he home?
No, Evan
It
Fleischman.
sounded like he was in the room with him.
Evan Fleischman is in the room with him.
I'm calling Evan and I'm trying to reach him right now. His phone
Okay.
is just ringing.
Right. And I know I've tried to call Joe. Her phone just rings also. It's ridiculous.
40 people.
Yeah.
No luck reaching Evan.
Right.
I'm trying also.
Well,
I wonder if Jessica is there.
Maybe try texting instead of calling.
I'm doing that now, and I'm also calling his house.
Yeah,
You think Jessica Fleischer might be there? I don't know. No idea who she is.
Oh, that's who.
He's still muted.
Oh, Evan's phone is off.
Uh,
How about if everybody goes to reactions and puts their hand up?
To their ears or something, yeah. Reactions.
You can try that.
Rabbi just showed up.
Yeah, I don't know if he's watching the screen or his own screen only.
Go to reactions and put up
To
your
where?
hand.
Reactions, yeah.
How about we all, I'm gonna sign out and then sign back in, maybe if everybody signs out and then signs back in.
No,
No?
nah.
well, he'll begin to wonder what's going on. If that does happen, it will cause some reaction.
Everybody's got their hand up if he sees it.
Yeah, but that's different than it being, that's different than being invited into a
Yes,
room all of a
yes.
sudden.
Raise his hand, okay. If we all raise our hands, maybe he'll see it.
They mean.
No, I think it's better to leave and. when he- and then
Okay.
sign-
I think I hear something now. Oh, no, that's not that.
Now he's unmuted. He's unmuted now.
Okay, everyone else should be.
Oh, there
You
he
gotta
is.
turn that off,
Oh,
Evan.
finally.
Finally.
Rabbi, you are muted for the entire presentation.
The entire presentation going forward or up till now?
No,
Until now.
until now. Now we
Yeah,
can.
since
I'll
the
start at
point
the
where
beginning.
we
Okay.
tried to fix the audio.
So we may go to watch your announcements before January 3rd, which is the next class. We may go to all Zoom then, maybe because of Omicron or maybe because of technical difficulties. Because doing it hybrid when we're trying to do it in Zoom and in person is, as you can see, is challenging. So, but I was saying at the beginning, as I had shared this passage from Elias Bickerman, was the most important scholar on the history of the Maccabean Revolt. This is a quotation from that he wrote in a 4-volume series called The Jews, Their History, Culture, and Religion, edited by Louis Finkelstein, was the chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. And Professor Bickerman says there is no, in his article about post-biblical Jewish history, there is no anti-Jewish passage in Greek literature before the Maccabean struggle, nor any recorded anti-Jewish action. Now, his point is that it is the military conflict between the Jews and the Seleucid Greeks that is the cause of the resentments against Jews in the Hellenistic world, in the Greco-Roman world. Professor Bickerman argues that there simply was no hatred against Jews before then. And I had introduced this volume that is not on the list of recommended readings that I gave you because I still continue. I've learned a lot even since then. And this is by Peter Schaefer, who's the professor of Jewish studies and classics at Princeton. And this book from 1997 is called Judeophobia, Attitudes Toward the Jews in the Ancient World. I wasn't able to get a copy of it in time, but my son Lawrence is home from college, so I asked him to take this out of the Wesleyan Library for me, so I was able to look up that it was on the shelf there, and that was convenient. At any rate, Professor Schaefer, basically, his book is a refutation of this statement from Professor Bickerman, where Peter Schaefer says, no, there certainly was an anti-Jewish animus. He calls it anti-Semitism. He calls it Judeophobia. He says we don't have to focus on, he says, who would spend time focusing on the differences between the different terms on how to spell anti-Semitism? That's not important, he says. But he says that clearly, though, there is a hatred of Jews that goes way back. It goes back to, as far back we can trace it, to 410 BCE, when there was the pogrom against the Jewish temple in Elephantine in the south of Egypt. Sorry for reading this again. I wanted to read you his opening paragraph in this book. Anti-Semitism has a long and endless history. A recent, quite telling offshoot of it appeared in the German spell check on my computer, an American product. The spell check stumbled over the word Judenfreundlich, which means friendly toward the Jews, which I had used in an article written in German and suggested replacing it with Judenfeindlich, which means hostile toward the Jews. At first, I was convinced I had spotted a little anti-Semite inside my computer who had ventured a nasty joke. But of course, the reality is less dramatic and yet highly significant for our subject. The German dictionary implanted into the computer simply doesn't include the word Judenfreundlich, Jewish friendly to Jews, and therefore suggests a substitute, which in the arrangement of its characters comes closest to Judenfeindlich. Hence, it turns out that the composer of the spell check had ventured not a bad joke, but a sophisticated judgment about the German language and the attitude toward the Jews expressed by it. The word Judenfreundlich does not exist because Germans never have been and never are friendly toward the Jews. Nothing could illuminate better the terrain on which a German author writing on anti-Semitism, even if only on the remote history of ancient anti-Semitism, must tread. So he gives that as his introductions, the first paragraph of the book there, which I thought was very telling. Now, I want to look, in order to weigh these two perspectives, whether anti-Semitism goes way back or whether it's a response to the Maccabees, to look at some of the sources and some of the history of anti-Semitism in the Greco-Roman period. This is almost an impossible thing to do in 1 hour, because it's covering a period of about 1,000, well, let's say a period of 500 or 600 years. It's even harder because we lost 15 minutes, but we'll do our best. So, next screen. Starting with the story of the Maccabees. So our first Maccabees is a source, is our oldest source on the revolt. And I took this from a few verses there from the first chapter that talk about King Antiochus and what is the decree that what did he decree that caused the Jews, or at least some of the Jews, to want to rebel. It says the king had sent messengers to Jerusalem and the cities of Judah that they should follow the ways of the people of the land. The people of the land meaning the Greeks who are in the land, not the Jews. Forbid the sacred burnt and meal offerings and libations, and profane the Sabbaths and festivals. They should pollute the temple and the priests, set up altars and temples to the gods, sacrifice the flesh of swine and other unclean animals. He further commanded they must leave their sons uncircumcised, raising them in impurity so that they will forget the laws of their God and change their ways. So it's basically a program forbidding the main elements of the Jewish religion, the sacrificial cult as passed down from the Torah, the observance of Shabbat, the observance of circumcision, which is certainly objectionable in a Hellenistic Greek concept, the prohibition against eating swine, eating pig, which from a Greek perspective was objectionable as well, and the sense that the Jews should now change their ways. Now, the way that Professor Bickerman taught everyone who, after his scholarship, to think about the Maccabean revolt is that it's not the Jews against the Greeks. It begins as a conflict within the Jewish community between Jews who wanted to preserve the ways of old against Jews that wanted to make reforms. He calls them the Reform Party, that wanted to Hellenize, that wanted Judea and wanted Jerusalem to be a part of the wider Greek world, of in the more global world of which the Greek language and Greek culture was bringing everyone closer together. Same kind of conflict that we see in our own day, right? Between internationalism, globalization on the one hand, and populist nationalism on the other hand. And one of the reasons why Professor Bickerman's interpretation has always made me a bit uneasy is that the Maccabees, who were taught to idolize as children, right, in Hebrew school, and B, that is, if not for them, we might not have Judaism as we know it, are sort of on the fundamentalist side here. Other historians have told the story in a way that though the Maccabees fought against the Hellenization, it wasn't a zero-sum game. It wasn't black or white. That the Maccabees and the what we call the Second Commonwealth, the Hasmonean kingdom that they set up, is not anti-Greek. That in fact they spoke Greek. The first book of Maccabees that we're reading is written in Greek, and that it wasn't a complete closing off of Judea to the modern world, but it was rather finding a way to be a part of that world, but at the same time may be true to the traditions of the Jews. In fact, the very festival of Hanukkah, the classicist Eric Gruen has pointed out, is itself a Hellenistic custom. The idea that you make a holiday to celebrate a military victory. It's a holiday that Judah Maccabee declares when they rededicate the temple after the victory over the Seleucid general Nicanor. That is a very Greek custom. You don't have that in any of the Jewish festivals before, where it specifically celebrates a specific battle, but is very common in Greek culture. So the point is that the Maccabees were living in a Greek culture, and it's not this culture against that culture, but yet there was struggles amongst the Jews. The bigger problem for many historians, besides the problem of why did the Jews rebel, the bigger problem is why did Antiochus persecute Judaism? Now, part of the answer is because some Jews called him in, and the books of Maccabees identify that. There are high priests, Jason and then the Menelaus, who are representatives of the Reform Party and want the king to pass these laws in order to change the way, to modernize the way that Judaism is practiced. Nevertheless, it was a real puzzle to current modern scholars, but also ancients as well. Because if you're a Hellenistic pagan king, you're supposed to be tolerant of other religions. It's counterintuitive for us to think about it. It doesn't, but if you think about it, monotheism is not tolerant of other religions because we believe there's only one God and that's ours. But if you're a pagan, if you're a polytheist, there's lots of gods. I worship mine here. You could, in Ridgewood, we worship the God of Ridgewood. In Glen Rock, you can worship the God of Glen Rock. That's okay, as long as you respect the God of Ridgewood when you come to Ridgewood. That was the way that things worked in the pagan polytheistic world. So why would Antiochus, who governed a huge, vast empire, as stretched from Turkey all the way to Afghanistan, why would he discriminate against the local religion? Some say he was crazy, that he was mentally unstable. That's one interpretation. But we're going to see some other interpretations as we move along. Now, I'm going to read this passage. I want to remember we were talking last week about the Exodus and how the Exodus is remembered in Jewish tradition in the Torah, right? As they leaving Egypt, and there were those passages about our approach to religion is different from the Egyptians. We believe in the one God. We also sacrifice animals to God. The Egyptians didn't sacrifice certain animals. We talked about the religious conflicts there. We also saw how in the papyrus, the Elephantine papyri from the pogrom in 410, we learned from 419 that they were worried about the Egyptians taking hostile actions against the Jews, probably because it was Passover when the Jew says, aha, we defeated your Pharaoh and drowned them in the sea. What's the Egyptian version? Now, Hecataeus of Abdera wrote, this is around 300 BC. This is the 100 years after the pogrom, the destruction of the Elephantine temple. So I want to read what he says, and we're going to go back to that question about Antiochus and the Maccabees. We'll come back to it. What is Hecataeus, who is he's a Greek writer, he's writing in Greek in Egypt. What does he say about the Exodus? He says, when in ancient times a pestilence arose in Egypt, the common people ascribed their troubles to the workings of divine agency. For indeed, with many strangers of all sorts dwelling in their midst, practicing rites of religion and sacrifice, their own traditional observances in honor of the gods have fallen into disuse. Hence, the natives of the land surmise that unless they remove the foreigners, their troubles would never be resolved. At once, therefore, the aliens were driven from the country. The greater number were driven into what is now called Judea, which is not far distant from Egypt and was at that time utterly uninhabited. The colony was headed by a man called Moses, outstanding for both his wisdom and for his courage. There are about a dozen other Egyptian sources that talk about the Exodus from Egypt and give an Egyptian version. It's what historians call counter history, right? When you tell, it's the other side tells a version that's more, that changes, you know, the who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. How do the Egyptians tell the story of the Exodus? There's no contemporary Egyptian sources on the Exodus. There's no Jewish sources on the Exodus that's contemporary with the Exodus, right? The Torah is written hundreds of years later. This is written in 300 BCE. The Exodus supposedly happened about 1200, so it's 900, you know, not centuries later. But the Egyptians know about the story of the Exodus. They know about it because the Jews are living in Egypt, in Alexandria, which is the major Greek city that was founded by Alexander the Great. It was a huge Jewish population there, besides the fact that we know that Jews already been living in Egypt for over 100 years before, that we know that from the Elephantine papyri. So how did the Egyptians tell the story? They know the story of the Exodus because the Septuagint is the Greek translation, is ordered by King Ptolemy so that the Hebrew Bible could be read in Greek. So, but they knew about it just from it being in the air. How do they respond? So here we say, look at the counter history, right? Yeah, there was a plague. So the Jews had to leave because there was a plague. So take certain things are the same. And the leader of the Jews was Moses. But it's not that they were forced, it's that actually the Egyptians expelled the Jews because we blamed them for the plague. So they had to leave. And then later sources, and this is from Apion, who lived now, this is 150 years later, and there's a lot of other sources I could show you that leads up from Hecataeus, Netho, that goes a lot of different Greek writers in Egypt, but I'm jumping to the end. Apion is important because Josephus, who's the great Jewish historian of the war, the first revolt against Rome, the 66 to 73 war. Josephus is known for his famous book, The Jewish War. And then he wrote a book called Jewish Antiquities. His last book is called Against Apion, where he cites this Greek writer from Alexandria who was, in our terms, an anti-Semite. And we don't have his work, but his work is preserved in the work of Josephus. And Josephus, who's living in Rome, writing in Greek, wrote his book as a response, a Jewish response to the anti-Semitic tract written by Apion. So this is what Apion, as quoted by Josephus, says about the Exodus. After a 6 days march, they developed tumors in the groin. And that was why, after safely reaching the country now called Judea, they rested on the 7th day and called that day Sabbaton, preserving the Egyptian terminology for disease of the groin in Egypt is called sabbatosis. Okay, that's where Shabbat comes from. Now, a few things here. So what was starting in Hecataeus and moving forward is that not only was there a plague, but then later writers in Egypt started to say that in fact, the Jews were all lepers. So what Pharaoh had to do is to get rid of these diseased people out of Egypt, but then Apion takes it all away, saying not only were they diseased, they were disease of the groin. It's a calumny, right? He has hatred for the Jews, and he sees them as the most disgusting that he could see. The reason why they have a Sabbath, right? And the Jews were often ridiculed by some pagan writers in the Greco-Roman period for being lazy, right? The Romans worked hard every day. The Jews, 6 days, I need a day off, right? And so Apion's saying, well, this isn't because of a gift given by their God, or it's because they had groin injuries. They couldn't walk for more than 6 days. And then they just had to rest because they were in pain. This idea of then giving a philological explanation that it's based on the Egyptian word sabbatosis. This is not where Shabbat comes from. Many scholars say it comes from an ancient Babylonian term, Shabbatu, that came in, that influenced ancient Judaism, ancient Israelite religion, I should say. But this idea of it's a pseudo-scientific anti-Judaism again, it will echo back to us in the end of the 19th century, as I was talking about 2 weeks ago, we had our first class, that the very term anti-Semitism is a pseudo-scientific term, a philological term about the roots of the language, but is that something new in the 19th century, or is anti-Semitism have a long history? Here we see an example of philology, the study of language, being used to make an argument against, a hateful argument against Jews that comes from 2,000 years ago. Now, what does Apion say about Antiochus Epiphanes? So now this is Josephus quoting Apion about Antiochus and why, giving an explanation of why Antiochus persecuted Judaism that brought about the Maccabean revolt. Antiochus, called Epiphanes, on defeating the Jews, had entered the innermost sanctuary of the God's temple. That's the temple in Jerusalem. And one thing you know about the temple, those of you that in my Mishnah class should know this very well, that it gets, as you get closer and closer, only the priest could go there, only the high priest. It was surrounded by walls and by gates. And we learned that in the time that the Seleucid kings that broke through the wall, it was probably Antiochus, so that it wouldn't be restricted to Jews. And then when the Maccabees rededicate the temple, they fill in those breaches in the walls to preserve, so it's only for Jews. So the Jewish temple was not open to the public. You could only be Jewish to get close enough to see what was going on there. So the non-Jews had all different ideas, and we're going to see some of the ideas that they had that were clearly not based in fact on what the Jews did in their temple. So according to Apion, Antiochus, called Epiphanes, on defeating the Jews, enters the innermost sanctuary of the God's temple, where it was lawful for the priests alone to enter, the Kohanim, the Jewish priests. Finding there a marble statue of a heavily bearded man seated on an ass. Now, there's a lot, you can trace this, and Professor Schaefer does in his book, that one of these other ideas, besides that the Jews were expelled from Egypt because they were lepers, another idea is they worship not a golden calf, but an ass, a donkey, which is not an attractive animal to worship. And there was a statue of Moses sitting on this ass. And that was what was inside the temple, because no one, even no Jew, go in the temple, right? So this is what they said was actually in the temple. So Antiochus finds this picture with a book in his hands, and that's the book of the law. And I want to remember this when we talking about anti-Jewish iconography in the Middle Ages, and the idea of the figures on cathedrals, Gothic cathedrals, of the ecclesia and the synagoga, when the church is standing proud and the synagogue is holding broken tablets. Again, here's an ancient antecedent of that, of this imaging of Moses holding the law inside the temple. And Moses, the founder of Jerusalem, of course, we know Moses didn't found Jerusalem, but they conflate that here. An organizer of the nation, the man, moreover, who had ordained for the Jews their misanthropic and lawless customs. And this we also see in a lot of the other sources of the anti-Jewish sources, that the Jews were criticized for not following the laws of everybody else, but also that the peculiar Jewish laws made the Jews xenophobic in that they were afraid of other peoples, and misanthropic in that they hated the rest of humanity, so that the Jews see themselves as the chosen ones, and they therefore hate everybody else. So since Epiphanes was shocked by such hatred directed against all mankind, he had set himself to break down their traditional practices. Now, we know that this didn't happen, because first book of Maccabees, second book of Maccabees doesn't tell us about Antiochus actually entering the temple. It says decrees that he made. But here there is a memory or fabrication of that. And one of the ways that it's understood by some scholars, including Elias Bickerman, who I quoted at the beginning, is that this is a defense of Antiochus, that this is a response, and this is that Greek thinkers, anti-Jewish Greek thinkers, want to explain why it was that a Hellenistic king would persecute Judaism. And this is why, because it's a reaction, because the Jews hate everybody else. Moving along. see if there's okay. Here we go. More libel from Apion, and you're going to see why I call it libel. Antiochus found in the temple a couch on which a man was reclining, with a table before him laden with a banquet of fish from the sea, beasts of the earth, and birds of the air, at which the poor fellow was gazing in stupefaction. The king's entry was instantly hailed by him with adoration, as about to procure him profound relief. Falling at the king's knees, he stretched out his right hand, implored him to set him free. The king reassured him and bade him to tell him who he was, why he was living there, what was the meaning of this abundant fare. Thereupon, with sighs and tears, the man, in a pitiful tone, told the tale of his distress. He said, Apion continues, that he was a Greek and that while traveling about the province for his livelihood, he was suddenly kidnapped by men of foreign origin and conveyed to the temple. There he was shut up and seen by nobody, but he was fattened on feasts of the most lavish description. At first, these unlooked for attentions deceived him and caused him pleasure. Suspicion followed, then consternation. Finally, on consulting the attendants who waited on him, he heard of the unutterable law of the Jews, for the sake of which he was being fed. I'm going to tell you that on the next screen. Basically, Antiochus goes in the temple. He sees some guy eating there, sitting down, eating a lot of food, having a banquet in the temple. Right? We know this is not true. First of all, we know that only the high priest went into the inner temple, and only the priests, they didn't eat inside there. And again, if this story happened, it would have been in Antiochus, because it would have been in the books of Maccabees, because it would have added to the explanation of what was so outrageous that the Jews rebelled. So he finds someone eating, and he says, who are you? And he says, oh, king, you saved my life. This is why I came in here. They kidnapped me, the Jews. They gave me all this food. I didn't know what it was. First, I was happy. And then after a while, I didn't understand why they keep feeding me. So then they told me the unutterable laws of the Jews. Obviously, it's utterable because they uttered it and told them. The practice was repeated annually at a fixed season. So every year the Jews did this. They would kidnap a Greek foreigner, meaning a foreigner like a Greek who's even a traveler, not even living in the land of Israel, but traveling through, fatten him up for a year, and then convey him to a wood, someplace in secret, where they slew him, sacrificed his body with their customary ritual, partook of his flesh, and while emulating the Greeks, swore an oath of hostility to all the Greeks. The remains of their victim were then thrown in a pit. The man, Apion continues, stated that he had now but a few days to live and implored the king out of respect for the gods of Greece to defeat the Jewish plot upon his lifeblood and to deliver him from his miserable predicament. Now, you see why I called it libel, that we think about the blood libel, the idea that once a year, there it's Passover, that the Jews will kidnap a Christian, usually it's a young Christian boy, and will kill him and use his blood for the making of matzah to celebrate Passover. That's what's called the ritual murder libel. And one of the other standard views of historians, that the position of Gavin Langmuir that I mentioned, I'll talk about when you read the ritual murder, he argued that the ritual murder calumny only begins starting in the 12th century and the 13th century, because that's when Christian anti-Semitism takes an irrational turn, and he gives an explanation why. But if you look at a source like this, you see that this is a ritual murder that is certainly just as irrational, that not only is older than the 13th century, it's older than Christianity. Now, we go back then to the question that Peter Schaeffer raises against Elias Bickerman. Is this because of the Seleucids and the Maccabees, right? Is this source here because they want to explain Antiochus? That's what's driving it. So the argument that Peter Schaeffer is making is that no, it flows from a whole tradition of Greek Alexandrian writings against the Jews that go back before the Maccabean Revolt. In fact, they're always there. He traces it back in just the nature of the Jewish population living amongst the Greeks and the Egyptians in Egypt. Again, there's no way to prove it either way, but I want to see here that clearly it's pre-Christian. Now, when we find sources like this, it doesn't mean, of course, that everyone living in the Greco-Roman world was anti-Semitic. Of course, it doesn't mean that. And the Greco-Roman world was filled with as many different opinions as there are in ours, probably more so, because they read books instead of watch social media. Well, probably very few read books. Whether a little more now, that's an important question. But those are the meta questions I want to keep inside. Yeah, sounds like Sylvia, like a Pizzagate. Exactly. And that's the point, though. And that's what Gavin Langmuir says about the 13th century ritual murder. And that's what you can see here. Now, whether Apion actually said it this way or whether Josephus is making it more outrageous, Josephus then turns around to argue that this is a ridiculous. So just so we understand the setting, it's a story about what happened in let's call it 167 BCE in Jerusalem, being told by a Greek living in Alexandria, Egypt at the beginning of the 1st century. So that's 200 years later, being preserved in a book written by a Jew, Josephus, written a generation later, right, in sometime in the 90s in Rome, but writing in Greek. So between Rome, Alexandria, and Jerusalem, that's sort of the triangle, and that geography is important. Understand that these issues are not localized to these single areas. So I want to look at, here's an older source here from Diodorus, another Greek writer from Egypt, but this goes the 1st century BCE. So this is a generation or two before the Apion is sort of the arch anti-Semite that Josephus quotes. But it's another story about Antiochus in the temple. And since Epiphanes was shocked by such hatred directed against all mankind, he had set himself to break down their traditional practices. Accordingly, he sacrificed before the image of the founder and the open-air altar of the god a great pig. So Apion tells a story that Jews did human sacrifice in the temple. Diodorus says Epiphanes walks in and in order to open the Jews, decides to sacrifice a pig on the altar in the temple before the image of the founder, as if there was a statue of Moses there, and poured its blood over them, over the altar. Now, again, those of you in my Mishnah class, we know we talk about the altar was the most sacred piece of furniture where you sought atonement before God. They would sprinkle the blood on the corners of the altar as the special, specifically on Yom Kippur, the ritual the high priest did. Here, Antiochus, a non-Jew, walks in, sacrifices a pig, and sprinkles the pig blood on the altar. Then, having prepared its flesh, he ordered that their holy books, the Torah, containing the xenophobic laws, the laws that teach the Jews to hate other people, should be sprinkled with the broth of the meat. That the lamp, which they call undying, that's the menorah in the temple, right? It's undying. That's why we got the Hanukkah story of the oil for the 8 days. That should be that they extinguished it. He blew out the menorah, and that the high priest and the rest of the Jews should be compelled then to actually eat the pork that he grilled and sprinkled the blood on the altar. Again, we know that this did not happen because if it did, it would have told us in First Maccabees, because this would clearly explain why the Jews would rebel. So it's told later from the Greek perspective, maybe an attempt to, I don't know if this exonerates Antiochus, but it shows his motivation, or using, and this is the other view, is that it's not a defense of Antiochus. It's not because of the Maccabean revolt. It just uses that story because it's certainly the whole world knew that Antiochus went to Jerusalem and that's why the Jews revolted, to use that to relay these hateful fallacies about the Jews. Now, this is an image of what Alexandria looked like. Where are these writings coming from? This is the city. It was Alexander's, really his There were many Alexandrias, but Alexandria in Egypt was the chief one. As historians say, the time there were 1 million people lived there. And in 38 CE, it broke out terrible conflict, riots against the Jews, between the Jews and the non-Jews in Alexandria. There are different versions of what happened. Josephus tells a story, Philo tells a story, but basically what happened was that in the year 38, which is right after a change of emperor in Rome, when Tiberius dies and Caligula becomes the emperor. And whenever you have a change of government, and this is something that holds true in every period in Jewish history, when you have a change of administration, change of government, the Jews get very nervous for good reason. As things go bad, there's a breakout of disorder when you have a change of government, especially when the new administration is not so stable. Like, for example, the administration of the Emperor Caligula. So conflict breaks out. The way Philo tells the story, the Jewish philosopher from Alexandria, is that Agrippa, who was the Jewish king, passes through Alexandria after Rome has authorized him to be the king in Judea. So the Jews come to welcome Agrippa, and then that causes the non-Jews to riot. And he's passing through also because he had to get appointed because of the new administration in Rome. So we don't know how the conflict started, but there are accounts that say that it was terrible massacres of the Jews. And I could have read you those passages, but it just says, fathers, wives, children massacred, bodies heaped, burned, it said, buildings destroyed, a huge pogrom and a destruction of life and property in 38 CE. What I want to focus on here is the multiple different conflicts, and this is one way of understanding why, the continuities in anti-Semitism. There's always multiple actors. And one way to think about it is, who are the Alexandrians? I shouldn't have put the bullet there. The bullet's after that. There are the Egyptians, but when we first say the Egyptians, we mean the native Egyptians. The Egyptians who lived in Egypt before Alexander the Great and the Greeks came. Then there are the Jews. The Jews, we know there's always been Jews living in Egypt. When they found the papyri from Elephantine, that was confusing because we thought the Jews left Egypt, but they're still there. So they're Jews who are connected to the Judeans. And then now there are the Greeks. There are Greek speakers that came into Egypt, especially in Alexandria, since Alexander established the city as a Greek city. And now we also have the Romans. The Romans are in charge. So think back to last week. I was talking about the attack on the Elephantine temple. We had the Jews, we had the Egyptians, and then we had the Persians, who was the empire. Here, there's an extra element, because now that you have the Greeks occupied Egypt, and now Egypt occupied by the Greeks is now a part of the Roman Empire. So you have all these different populations, and they speak different languages too. The Egyptians speak the native Egyptian language, and the Jews speak Aramaic, and the Greeks speak Greek, and the Romans speak Latin. So those languages, even though they also spoke their other language, everyone knew a little bit of Greek, and you had to learn enough Latin to read the road signs, the laws. But it divided, the peoples were divided. One of the results of the conflict in 38 is the Jews, what Philo says, were forced to live in a small sector of the city. It's the oldest reference to the idea of the ghettoization of the Jews being forced into a ghetto. A way that a number of historians explain this is that the Greeks or the Egyptians, and it's unclear if it's the natives or the Greeks, but what they are upset about is being occupied by Rome. The Greeks in Egypt hated the Romans, but they can't fight Rome. So instead they fight the Jews because the Jews are protected by Rome. Just like the Jews were protected by Persia and Elephantine. The Jews, because they are a separate people, are always going to have, and because they don't identify with the native population of this area. Therefore, the native population is always going to resent when they resent the imperial power, they take it out on the Jews because the Jews are the sign of the protection or the hand of the empire. So rather than rebel against Rome, they want to attack the Jews. And especially when you have a period of change of administration, the Roman governor in Alexandria thought he could score some points with the local population by letting them attack the Jews. In the end, he got exiled and executed. That happened a lot if you were in government in the Roman times. But then what happens is the Jews, then there's delegations of Jews and the Greeks who go to Rome to kind of argue it out after things quiet down. They first go to see the emperor. It took them about 6 months until Caligula would give them an audience. Caligula listens to both sides. He gets very upset with the Jews that the Jews don't want to acknowledge him as a god. And then they go home, and then Caligula soon after gets assassinated for different reasons. And Claudius becomes a new emperor. So the embassies stay, and they want to talk to Claudius. And one of the Jewish arguments is, we are Alexandrians. We've been living in this city from the beginning, and we should have citizenship. And the Greeks, who speak on behalf of the local Alexandrians, and those are the natives who are the real anti-Semites, who we might say, who are not even in Rome, they say, no, the Jews are foreign. And all of these colonies against the Jews are a way of saying, oh, the Jews hate other people because they're not friendly. Josephus, in Against Apen, argues back, no, the Jews love other people. The Jews are universalists. So they appear before Claudius. And this is an actual text, an authentic text. The papyrus was found of Claudius's decree in 41. So 2 years later, he's heard both sides. He passes this decree, this edict that's brought to Egypt. And this is what the Emperor Claudius wrote. These are excerpts from it. I took the important parts. With regard to the responsibility for the disturbances in rioting, or rather, to speak the truth, the war against the Jews, he said, let's be honest, this isn't a riot. This was a war against the Jews. Unless you stop this destructive and obstinate mutual enmity, I shall be forced to show what a benevolent ruler can be when he is turned to righteous indignation. It won't be that benevolent, he's saying. Even now, therefore, I conjure the Alexandrians to behave gently and kindly toward the Jews. Now, he's saying to the Alexandrians, you better not attack the Jews. But he's also saying, you're the Alexandrians and they're not. The Jews are the other. Josephus has a version of Claudius's letter. Josephus's version is very different. It's totally pro-Jewish and anti-Greek. Here, it's a little more on the Greek side, even though he tells the Greeks, now, don't do that again. No more killing tens of thousands of Jews in my city. So I conjure the Alexandrians to behave gently and kindly towards the Jews who have inhabited the same city for many years, because that's what the Jewish delegation said. They've lived here for many years. You think about how this reverberates later in European history, right? Whether the Jews belong in the countries where they're being attacked or expelled from. And not to dishonor any of their customs in their worship of their God, as they did in the time of the god Augustus, the first emperor, and as I too, Claudius, have heard both sides have confirmed. But the Jews, on the other hand, now let me say something to you. I order not to aim at more than they have previously had. And not in, like, don't try to surpass your place. Know your place, right? Don't, you got what you got, accept that, you're not gonna get more. And by the way, in the future, don't send me 2 embassies. This is a great part. As if, it should be as, not a if, as if they lived in 2 cities, a thing which has never been done before, right? Meaning that, and this is so, we talk about how 2 Jews, 3 opinions, right? Jews can never agree. The Jewish community of Alexandria was not united. Surprise. And it was not organized, and they couldn't agree on one embassy, so they sent 2 rival embassies to Rome to represent the position of the Jews. And the way most historians read it, one embassy, which was headed by Philo, was the more quiet one, like let's establish the peace, the more behind the scenes. The other was a more vocal embassy that said, we want equal citizenship. Sort of like in the 40s and 50s, the 40s, the difference between the American Jewish Committee and American Jewish Congress, right? Two very different approaches. But here, this is from 2,000 years ago. It's the same thing. And Claudius wants none of it. He says, next time you get your house in order, I'm not going to listen to two different Jewish embassies. This has never happened before. And not to include themselves in the games, meaning the Jews stay out of the games, right? It's not really your city. You don't really have a part in it. You can live there, your lives will be protected, but know your place. Since they enjoy what is their own in a city which is not their own, and yet they possess an abundance of all good things, right? The Jews are foreigners, they're others. They do well, they shouldn't complain. Nor are they to bring in or invite Jews coming from Syria or Egypt. No more Jews can come in. That's like the British white paper in Palestine, right? We're going to cap the we're going to cap the population. And this is Egypt. So what does it mean in Egypt? It means from the rest of Egypt, meaning there were else Jews outside the country, not just in Alexandria, the city. Or I shall be forced to conceive graver suspicions. If they disobey, is half proceed against them, that I shall, I meant to say, I have to fix that. I shall proceed against them in every way as fomenting a common plague for the whole world. Now, when the Rome raises its legions to fight against the Jews, that's 30 years later, 35 years later in the Great War. But here Claudius is saying, don't go against Rome. And if you both give up your present ways and are willing to live in gentleness and kindness with one another, I, for my part, will care for the city as much as I can, as one which has long been closely connected with us. So we see here how in Rome, the Roman emperor sort of hearing a very anti-Semitic delegation. Who led the Alexandrian delegation? Apion, the arch anti-Semite. He was the head of that one. Philo was the head of the Jewish delegation. So these are these figures coming together before the emperor, and the emperor has heard a lot from both sides, and his answer is the Jews are not equal. They're another, but what you can read between the lines in Claudius's letter, it's that there is this incredible strife, and Claudius knows that the resentment against the Jews is because the Jews are guaranteed right of safety by Rome. He acknowledges and reiterates that right, but he understands and he wants to manage the anger of the non-Jewish population that he knows is really directed against him. He wants to go along with the pretend that it's really directed against the Jews because he needs to govern them. So there's this very tense maintaining of the peace here. This is something that will play out over and over and over again in the history of anti-Semitism. And it's one way of understanding how anti-Semitism works. How you have an imperial authority, a central authority, and then you have a local resentment against that, which is then directed against the Jews in a triangle. Okay, I know we're at 9. Give me another 10 minutes, and I'll try to, because we missed some with our technical difficulties. So maybe less than 10 minutes. Of course, as I said, 35 years later, we have the Great Revolt. This is, and the two images here on the top, that is Herod's temple. A very Greek looking building, by the way, that is destroyed when Titus leads the Roman legions into Rome and the temple's destroyed. And at the bottom is Masada, which is also built by Herod, and that's the last stand. So the zealots continue to fight until Masada falls in 73. There are many, many different opinions among scholars of why this revolt broke out. One, the solution that I taught the most is that it was right around the early 60s when construction of the temple finally ended. So you all of a sudden had tens of thousands of unemployed workers in Jerusalem. So that caused economic issues, which caused anger. But the way I want to focus on it here is, and this is the way that Josephus explains how the original hostilities began really in Caesarea before they get to Jerusalem is conflicts between the different populations, between the Jewish population and the Greek population. One thing that we know, and if you visit Israel and visited the archaeological sites, you know this, that there are Greek cities in the middle of the land of Israel. And they weren't populated by Jews, although there were Jews in them, they were populated by Greeks who were just like there are Greeks living in Egypt, there are Greeks living in the land of Israel. And the Jews and the Greeks are in mixed cities. And Caesarea was a mixed city. And then you have the Romans who are the empire. So you have the same triangle here where there's conflict of Greeks against Jews on the street in a local city, but the Greeks will conflict. And one way to understand is because the Greeks themselves are being governed by Rome, right? When it was part of the Seleucid Empire, although it went back and forth between the Hasmoneans in Jerusalem and Antioch, then under Pompey, it becomes, in the 1st century BCE, it becomes a part of Rome. And Rome is trying to govern these different populations. And there's the enmity between the populations, and the Jews find themselves on the bottom of the triangle, and they revolt, and the revolt has disastrous consequences. But we don't know, and we don't have any clear proof that the Roman motivations here was anti-Semitism. On the contrary, it's the Jews who rebelled. The Jews rebelled against Rome. The story of Hanukkah is a more important story for the history of anti-Semitism because for some reason Antiochus persecuted the Jews that brought the Jews to rebel. In this case, there wasn't any Roman instigation against the Jews that caused it. It just erupted, is how most people understand it. And one of the reasons I'm suggesting is could be the enmity between the different populations. But then we go to Hadrian. So let's go forward now to he ruled from 117 to 138. The 130s, the end of his reign, is the Barcode Revolt, or the Jewish War II. And the Barcode Revolt is the next generation that rebels against Rome. Also ends in disaster. And after the end of the Barcode Revolt is when the rabbis then assumed the new strategy of accommodation with Rome. This is the last attempt of the Jews to fight against Rome. And the sources are very ambiguous. And we don't know why this revolt happened. We know that Hadrian had decrees against the Jews. And we know that they flattened Jerusalem so that you couldn't rebuild the temple. He decreed that Jews couldn't be circumcised, they couldn't teach Torah. But we don't know, and historians debate this, whether the Hadrianic decrees or the Hadrianic persecutions are a punishment for the Barcode Revolt, or that they're the cause of the Barcode Revolt. And we don't know. It's one or the other. And maybe we'll find at some point proof, but we don't know. And it would make sense if it was a punishment for it. If it's not a punishment for, why would Hadrian? And so one of those that say at least some of the decrees were before that caused the revolt. If Hadrian decreed that Jews could not practice circumcision. Now, circumcision, the Romans didn't like circumcision. And when they allowed it in Rome, there was a special decree that Jews could circumcise their own children, but they couldn't circumcise other people because they didn't want Jews to proselytize. And there's a whole discussion about that. Here, some scholars say that Hadrian didn't like circumcision because it was a violation of the body. And the Romans considered circumcision equivalent to castration, that it was a mutilation of the body that they wanted to forbid in their realm. And he might have been driven by those Hellenistic ideas that clearly conflict with Jewish tradition, and that might have been a cause there for the war. And but even if that's the case, then you see, is it because of his opinion about circumcision, or is it because of his hatred for the Jews? There is no way for us to point to the fact that he was driven specifically by hatred of the Jews. We know that the Jews hated the Romans, they fought against them. But when we look for where does anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism comes from, I'm going to summarize here. We see roots of it in Egypt, roots of it in Alexandria. We see it come about when we have this the triangle with the Jews at the bottom of the triangle, and it's expressed by those in the Greek-speaking world who hated Jews. It's expressed as the Jews are not open to the world and to humanity, which is an ironic way of expressing prejudice. Say, I am prejudiced against these people because they're intolerant and they're prejudiced against everybody else. And that's part of the irrationality of anti-Semitism. But understand it, we have to go into those minds and understand that, and then we see that repeated. And this is the challenge for us to think about. It's so irrational, and yet it's so long-lasting throughout the broad spectrum of history. We take off next week, and then we, in 2 weeks from now, we talk about the onset of Christianity, and then and the anti-Judaism that we find in the Christian scriptures. We're going to do 2 sessions on Christianity, because then the week after that, we'll talk about anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism in the church fathers. Let me see if there's any quick questions before we go. Lenrock and Ridgewood synagogues, Mary says, right, with the different appendices. Thank you very much. Enjoy the week, the new year, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Happy solstice.
Yep. Lila Tov.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Yom Sylvester.
Right, but I had to stand in front of the screen tonight for them to hear me. There's every time we
Tov, Rabbi. Nice lecture.
Very nice.
Right, I was trying to speak from
good.
here, but the mic-
Thank you, Rabbi.
I mean, I could put this over. Yeah, well,
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
no, it has to be in front of the screen. To the, we'll figure out. A lot can happen in the next 2 weeks, right? Okay. Good night, everyone.
Night, everybody.
Good to see you all.
Night.
See you Wednesday.
Thank you. Yeah.